Is there any desire to make movies or something else with Crit?
Animation is already something I've started to work with. Spoken to a few artists. I've got a film company signed on for it. I just don't have the resources at hand to do it. Yeah, so I'm in North Carolina. We have production studios. I work before any of this. I've actually worked in the production studio since 2006. So, I've been a producer, done other stuff with like local films here. We've had 2 or 3 that went to movie theaters. We won a couple awards a couple years ago. Last year we won an award. So, given most of what we do is more drama horror stuff, so we actually had a round table a year and a half ago about where we wanted to go with different projects, and I just said I want to work on animation for my comic, and everyone agreed. Like, the story's written. All I have to do is hand the comics to somebody and say, animate this. Here you go. It's just finding the right animator, B, the funding for it, because it's very expensive. Thousands of dollars for just a minute worth of content.
Yeah.
The goal is to get about 3 to 5 minutes worth of content and then use that as a pitch. So I need to find what issue I want to use, like what's the catchiest I can do in 3 to 5 minutes. And that's the tricky part. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there. We've done a few small things, but it's not the easy trying to do it right. There's a difference between, oh, this is cool, this is cheap, let me put this out there. If we're going to do animation, for one, it's going to be done right. For two, I've got to get the right voice people involved. I know a few voice actors as well, and I've spoken to them, and they're like, yeah, we can do that. But those voices also have to coincide with the real life people that play those characters. So there's just a lot of moving parts there. But the goal, I really want to get on Apple TV. I've been fighting for that one, not Netflix, not Prime, not these other ones, because Apple TV doesn't have any animation. So, yeah, getting onto Apple, you're not going to be one of many. You're going to be one. That's it. And that's what I've said since last year. When we started deciding where we wanted to pitch to, I said, Apple's my first one. Apple's where I want to go. I don't want to go anywhere else first. I want them to see it before anybody else. If they say no, we'll go somewhere else. But Netflix is inundated with animation so much that they're canceling some of it. Even if you go to like HBO Max and all these other like streaming services, they just have tons of animation that's their own. The one I really want is that. And Hulu is owned by Disney, so it's not like you're going to get anything out of them. Netflix has ties to Disney, like all these different things. I just want one that has like nothing going on for it, so you could be the first.
That's actually a really good idea too, because Apple is doing a lot of pushing for their content. So if you're their first animated thing, like that would be something you could get a heavy push for. So that'd be an incredible way to do that.
We got the contact information for Apple. Now it's just putting together the pitch. And then you have to get legal involved, and because you don't want to go in and just say, hey, I have this idea and not have any legal backing on it. If so, you just won't have an idea anymore, and they're going to walk away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we've pitched to like BET before. We've actually had one thing get picked up by them a few years ago. Universal, we did a bunch of indie stuff. So I've already got that. I just need to find the resources and people to do it. That's it.
Yeah, animation.
So if there are rich people that want to have a cartoon, let me know.
Yeah, I was actually curious if you were able. So this is just something I was thinking about, where a lot of people, the reason why they put their own stuff together is because they want to be able to own their IP and not hand it off. And one of the things that I actually have a client where I'm working in 2 different capacities. One is for equity share of the company, so partial ownership of the company, but the other is like revenue share. And basically, it makes me think Arnold Schwarzenegger, his most profitable film was Twins. And the reason why is because for that film, he specifically gave up a huge chunk of his payment so that the film could be made because they didn't have enough funding in exchange for royalties on the film. So even though it's not his most famous film by far, it's his most profitable film. And so I'd be curious if you could end up finding any animators who, literally I would send them every one of the comics, let them read through them, see, what potential it has, show them your ratings on various comic book sites and how, people have, really enjoyed it. Even photos and footage from conventions you've been to, and say, hey, I would love to work with you guys. I don't have the capacity for this. I don't want to give up IP because I don't want to destroy the brand, but I would love to give revenue shares for anything I can work out with this. And then, maybe even potentially work in some capacity like that.
Well, yeah, I've thought about it because most likely what would happen is if it got picked up by a studio, like say Apple picked it up, they're going to want to hire, be part of that process of whoever gets to animate it. So most likely whoever I get to do these 3 minutes, they're not going to, most likely, you know what I mean? Like they're not a big studio. I don't foresee any service being like, oh yeah, you've got your own guy, go ahead and use your guy. They're going to say, here's, however much money, and here's a list of animators, go use one of these that we've already used or something to that effect. I know that's how a lot of those studios work. So to your point, that would be beneficial. I wouldn't mind giving up some of the profit because out of the gate, they're going to give me X amount of money just to use my idea. So then I can give the animator, say, instead of $3,000 a minute, they get $10,000 a minute because, we got a couple $100,000 or $250,000 to do a couple episodes. Here you go. Drop in the bucket at the end of the day,
Exactly. That's why I'm saying like that might be a really good way to keep as much IP so that you have the room to negotiate with Apple and basically be able to still adequately pay the animators who ultimately would make the deal happen. So it's right. Like, you could be like, hey, you get a chunk of whatever advance I get from this. That would be, because like that's hugely different than like some people, because like I do know artists that are willing to work for like Kickstarter funding. They'll be like, oh, I'll just take a percentage of Kickstarter funding. But there's a difference. Like your particular IP, I've seen it on other comic sites rated highly, like completely not looking for it. Like I ran across it. So like it's gotten traction out there. Obviously you go to conventions and you're making sales there. Like you have the experience that most other comic creators won't have that, like, what I mean? Like there's all of, like, if you put a good enough pitch together to an animation team, that might be something that you could get like a way better initial pricing for, exchange of future, income. And it would not be like, it would be something worth taking the risk on because the risk level is much lower than for most other things like a random Kickstarter.
Right. I mean, that's a good point. I don't, it's funny. I actually don't even think about how much traction the past I've been doing this. The first issue was released in 2020. Somebody recently told me the same thing. They were like, in 3 years, you've done 7 different books. You've got a side story and you've got a trade paperback now. You've got over almost 300 pages worth of content in 3 years where most creators don't have that. And I was like, oh, that's kind of, I never thought about that. Oh, you have a stuffed animal, you have an energy drink, you have a backpack, you've got various different toys out. And I was like, oh, to me, I'm just moving to the next thing. I don't really look backwards at what we've done. And someone recently told me I need to look backwards and see the things that we've actually accomplished as far as like in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, that's kind of cool. Not gonna lie.
but like that is a big deal though. Like having, like, it's good to not look back because that's why you're moving faster than most people. Most people, they make their first comic and they're like, I'm so awesome. And then it takes forever to get the next one. Some people it's funding because they're not the artist, right? For us, like that's our biggest pitfall is that, we're not the artist. So that slows us down tremendously. And so like, that's a big deal that you're able to move that fast. And most of it's because you're just like next. But it's mostly when you go to pitch to somebody that, even getting somebody else's outside perspective like this, like just getting that little bit of like, hey, do you have all this stuff that if you walked up to someone and you're not like, I want to make an animation. It's like, no. I have all of this stuff and I want to make an animation. You know, like, so it's definitely a
a good point.
worthwhile investment to put that together. And that's coming from the perspective of like, if I'm, I do marketing for clients, and the thing that helps me get more clients now is that I finally started capturing case studies. Like, I wasn't going back and looking at the stuff I did, putting it into something I could hand to somebody. And now I'm like a couple of Facebook ad screenshots and suddenly I get more clients. Like, yeah, I didn't even realize if I just shared this little bit of information, like most people don't have this.
Yeah, I should do that. Someone said recently, like, you need to Google C.R.I.T, like, and figure out where you're at, because somebody did it. They just looked up, they were looking for something with the site, and they were like, you're in a lot of places. And I was like, I didn't know that. My wife's been a big advocate for making our website more Google friendly, so we pop up more. And actually, to that, what something that happened that was really, really cool last week. I have 102 employees, and we're coming to the end of our season. They're all seasonal. They leave for about 6 months. They come back. And one of my employees had gotten a book from me, a comic book. She just thought it was cool that her boss did comics, because as you can see, this is what I do when I'm on my video calls and stuff for work. This is my backdrop. So everyone always asks me, "Oh, you're like a huge nerd." I'm like, well, most of the artwork that you see, actually every piece of art you see on the wall, is from my stuff, or books of my friends and things. So I get to talk about it a lot. And when my employees calls me, she's like, Chris, I'm going to be up 15 minutes late to work. I was like, oh, no big deal. Like, it's the last couple days of tax season. No one's there. And she's like, no, I got stuck at my house because my neighbor and their kid came over to pick up my kid, and they saw your comic book, and her kid went nuts because I know the creator of C.R.I.T. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And she lives 2 hours away from me. I have half the state of North Carolina I run. And so she doesn't live anywhere near me. I don't even know this kid. That's her. And they apparently know everything about me and D&D, and they have the stuffed animal and a couple of the figures. I was like, okay, so this is like one of the bigger backers, where they saw me at a convention somewhere, and they were talking about how they follow the Instagram, they're on the website, and I was like, that's cool. I never, like, someone who I don't know who this person is, because this kid's like 11, 12 years old, like the age of my daughter. I don't know the kid. But my employee was like, you just made me the coolest person on the block. So that was actually really cool to hear. And we've had a few instances of that where a friend of mine, actually Boulder, the character Boulder, his wife was at work one day, and a guy came up to her and said, hey, you should have your husband read this comic book. He reminds me a lot of one of the characters in it. And she goes, what comic book? And he's like, oh, it's this indie comic, C.R.I.T. And she laughs. She goes, are you talking about Boulder? And he goes, oh, you know the book? She's like, yeah, Boulder is my husband. And we don't even know who this person is. Like, aside from him being at work with his wife, like, we don't associate with him. And so it's just kind of cool to see that kind of stuff. And it's happening, more and more. These people are just starting to read it and get out there. It probably helps that Free Comic Book Day, I do quite a bit around here. When I was I told you I was signed to a record label. My old record label owner, he sold most of the rights to Sony when we were on there. So it's like they're a subsidiary now of Sony. So he doesn't do nearly as much as he used to. And I was just talking to him when we did a reunion this year. And I was like, oh, so what have you been up to? It's been a while. And him and I used to be pretty close. And he's like, oh, that comic book store that I used to work at? I said, oh, yeah, like, you quit because the label got big. He's like, oh, I went around and I bought it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Guess what I do now? He's like, I need to have you come up and table one day. He's like, because we get a lot of the music fans that come in, because he sells the music in the comic book store. And he's like, so your CDs are there, and we can do your table at the same time. So I thought that was kind of cool. So I'm going to hit him up probably because May 6th is Free Comic Book Day. So I might just go out to Raleigh and set up a table and hang out for a day and order some pizza and, shoot the shit with my old record label owner, who has millions of dollars now because of the bands that he's worked with. But kind of cool. He just buys a comic book shop.
Yeah. See, Greg, we got to do more Free Comic Book Day stuff. That's what we got to do.
We haven't done anything like that yet. So, yeah.
If you can give away product, you will grow your audience that much faster. When I was at the convention, I always have a stack of stuff that I can give away. Usually it's something where the corners bent, or my printers refunded me because it was damaged in shipping. Tossing those, I just put everything to the side because if it's a free comic book, nobody cares. I actually went to a
Greg,
couple gaming conventions. What?
I was gonna say we have a comic that is missing a page, so we could
Just
give
it
that
away. If you want the full book, pay for it. We're EA. Downloadable content. But yeah, I went to a couple conventions where I had so I ordered 200 copies of issue 3, 100 of each different cover, and they all came wrong. The color, and I'm very particular. The color in the book wasn't bad. Like, you can give it to somebody, they're never going to notice the difference. It was just a shade too dark. And I pulled issues 1 and 2 and I put them side by side. And Boulder is the most obvious out of all of them. And I said, hey, here's like pretty much the same lighting in these 2 books. And then you have this book and it's too dark. And he's like, just keep them. I don't care what you do with them. Don't ship them back to me. I'll have a new batch to you next week. So I had like 200 books that I had no use for. I'm like, I didn't pay for them. I've given them away. I went to a couple conventions and I just put issue 3 out there. And issue 3 was, I'm very proud of that book. A lot of action, a lot of cool story pieces, a lot of like villain pieces. And so I just put them at conventions. I'll just bring a backpack full of books and I'll drop like 5 at a table. Or we went to like one convention where there was a big comic book shop that just had bins and bins and bins. And so I just like went to the table and I said, hey, can you hand out to anybody that buys comic books from you? Can you give them a free comic book? And so like their customers were getting free books. And then that week I gained almost like 500 followers on my social media. And I get a notification every time I get a unique hit on my website, like not someone returning, but a new hit. And I had one day my notifications were just off the wall. So that means that the probably 60, 70 books I handed out turned into word of mouth and other people reading them. Because you know what kids do at the conventions. One kid has a book, everybody reads it. So I thought that was really cool. That was the smartest thing I had done, was just go around and be like, hey, hand this to your client. Here's a free thing for you to pass out. I did that.
And it makes them look better too. Like the person who's handing it out for free, like they get to look better for giving away free stuff.
Exactly. It's like, oh, cool. You got like some superhero comic books in here. You got like, some fantasy stuff. Boom. Here's a free book.
One thing I was going to say that made me think of was Red Bull. Like the company Red Bull doesn't even make Red Bull. They're just a marketing company. And the biggest thing that they do is give away free Red Bull. And they're one of the top energy drink companies in the world.
They pay girls to ride around in a little Red Bull truck.
Yeah, it's like a Mini Cooper turned into a pickup truck with a Red Bull can in the back.
It is hilarious. I remember we played a show, I think in Virginia, and I walked out and there were these 2 girls just walking. And we're in a band, and we're like, okay, cool. I was in my early 20s. Oh, cool. Girls are walking up to us. Oh, do you want free energy drink? And at the time we signed with Rockstar, so we weren't allowed to actually. Like if we were playing a show or doing anything related to like the band, we weren't allowed to be seen with anything else, or else we'd be in breach of contract. And I was like, no, I can't take your drink. And they're like, why not? I'm like, believe me, I would. I love Red Bull, but I signed with Rockstar, and we had this big Rockstar plaque on the side of our truck. And I was like, so unfortunately, no, I can't. I tried. Best and worst decision, though, because we had Rockstar and we had Jägermeister. And I will just say that was like the best and worst tour we ever had.
Yeah, that's both awesome and terrible. That's it.
Yeah, it's like, how do you wake up from a hangover? More alcohol. We just had cases of it. We had cases of Jaeger and cases of Rockstar in our van, and we got pulled over. This was the best thing. Oh God! So we get pulled over on tour because our door wouldn't shut right. So we had to take 100-mile-an-hour tape and wrap our van in this tape to keep the door shut, because in the middle of winter, and we'd be driving down the road, and all of a sudden the door would just open.
Oh, Jesus.
And then on top of it, one of the hinges was bad. So we were afraid it would not just open, but fly off. So we had to tape this thing on. And the tape gave away a little bit, and it tore, because it had been like a whole month of, traveling with this on there. And the tape starts to fall off. So you have me holding one person, him holding another person, the other person holding the door as it's like falling off the van. And the cops pull us over. And we're like, oh God, hide the alcohol, because we just have cases of alcohol in our van everywhere. And he comes over and he's like, what's going on? And we start telling about the door and all this other stuff. And of course the door's hanging off, so he can see inside the back seat. I mean, it's not at night, so he's got this flashlight trying to look at the door, and he sees cases of alcohol. He goes, what? But before I even ask, what's going on with all the alcohol? And I was like, and I had shown him our contracts and everything. So he's going through and he's like, so you have Rockstar and Jägermeister. I said, yeah. He goes, how many Jaeger bombs do you do a day? I said, not when we're driving. I said, I usually wake up to 1 or 2 because that's how we wake up, because we usually go to bed drunk. He was really cool, though. He helped us tape the whole thing back together. He
awesome.
Actually escorted us to a Walmart parking lot so we could get more. Like, he was a cool cop. But that was the funniest thing. Like, you just see a cop pull us over as it's like a cartoon, as 3 people are holding each other, holding a door on. It was comical. One of my favorite and worst experiences on tour.
That's definitely awesome.
That's going to go in the book. I'm going to have their door fall off and have them all holding each other as they hold it.
That's such a cool idea.
Yeah.
I love taking like little scenarios in your own world that like, it's like you can put that in there, and like it's just like a little thing you can share at a convention where, like, that one person who comes up to your table who asks about it, like, oh, how'd you come up with this idea? And it's like, oh, here's this little insider scoop. Like, it's I love talking about like Easter eggs are cool, leaving them in the comics, but I love, like, every once in a while Greg and I will say something in one of our podcasts or on a podcast with somebody else that, like, we try not to say anywhere else, just because if someone becomes a true fan and they're eating up all this media, like eventually they hear this one thing and they're like, oh, did you know that this is why? Oh, you didn't know? You didn't see that one episode back then? Like, I love thinking about that stuff.
Cool. We have that in issue 4. That's like our Easter egg. That's not an Easter egg. Is when they're talking about which song to play. And the insert song, that's probably one of my favorite things we've done in any book. It's just the insert song. I even go back and like reread it, and I know it's there, and it still makes me laugh. It's like insert song. And then we did a voiceover where we all read our parts. So we did like the digital readout, and I had Brad go back in and voice over the insert song. So it's like, insert song every time he says it. So it's like, it like pops out at you. Someone asked me, like, what's the insert song? Like, I'm like, oh, you put your own song in your own head there. So, like, the song that you choose is the greatest song of all time. They're like, oh, that's really smart. I'm like, we didn't mean to do that. That was all an accident. It was done in lettering, and I totally forgot about it until the very end. And they're like, just keep it. And it just worked perfectly.
Yeah, it's so awesome.
I love those.
Greg, is that all the front end questions? Are we ready to head over to Nova Nation?
Yeah.
Cool, nice. Yeah, we got to share that cool story before, but yeah, Greg apparently has a new Nova Nation animation to send us on over. So before we go there, for anybody who's not going over to Nova Nation, where can they find you?
Homebrewedcomics.com is the easiest. That has links to all our social media. Instagram is probably my most prominent. That's at homebrewedcomics. And then we have a Twitter and a Facebook, which is at Homebrewed Comics as well, but instead of CS, it's just an X at the end.
Nice.
Cool.